Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of I Like to Read with me, your host, Rachel Polanski. Today, I am very, very excited to be joined by the illustrious author, Annie Hartnett. Annie is the author of two novels, Rabbit Cake, which was released in 2017 by Tin House Books, and Unlikely Animals, released this year by Ballantine Random House. Welcome, Annie. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I loved both of your books. I actually started with Unlikely Animals, and then I went back to Rabbit Cake because I loved it so much. So I want to start with just some more general questions, and we can touch on both of the books through that. My first question is, did you always love to write, or is there a specific moment in your life that you kind of fell in love with writing? And what made you gravitate towards fiction and evolve with that medium?
Yeah, so I did not always want to be a writer. I probably always liked to write, but I didn't know that I wanted to be a writer for I think longer than, I don't know, you probably talk to a lot of writers, so I always hear that people say, I always wanted to be a writer.
No, not always. I think sometimes it happens, like a story happens or a circumstance in your life, and it kind of you realize you have a story, because I think that's something that not a lot of people think that they can write, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. So I really wanted to be an artist. So I was super into drawing as a kid and in high school. And then I did have a high school teacher who was my art teacher up until senior year. And she also taught an AP art history class. And so that year, she pulled me aside after I'd written a paper for her class, and she said, Annie, I know you love art and want to be an artist, but I think you're a much better writer than you are an artist.
Interesting.
I was like, okay, thanks.
Sort of a backhanded compliment in a way, I guess.
But it did kind of make me think, like, okay, just because I like this doesn't necessarily mean I should pursue it in college, Uh-huh. So I went to college and I was a philosophy major, and didn't really know what I was going to do with it, other than I had this professor I loved. And there was also a lot about sort of like environmental ethics in the philosophy classes and animal welfare and rights stuff, which I was super and still am interested in. But then my last semester of college, I took a class with a visiting professor. And I remember I was waitlisted for this class. And it was a fiction class, and it was like intermediate fiction. And I took this class, and he was visiting from Syracuse, Chris Kennedy. And he said, he gave us like a bunch of stories, Amy Bender, and she's a Los Angeles person.
I think her name sounds familiar.
Yeah, she's at UC Irvine, I think. And George Saunders, and those stories like blew my mind. And it just was stuff that I had not sort of read before, no one had recommended. They're just like weird, but they also felt like they were saying like important things about the world. And I was just like sort of wanted to write stories just like those stories. And so I was writing stories for him that were very influenced by what he was giving us in class. And he said, in a meeting one time, he was like, you should go get an MFA. Like, I think you're talented and you seem to really like it. And I was like, what's an MFA? So, so he explained to me about MFAs in the creative writing world. And so once I had that direction, that like push from him, I was all in, but it happened in such an accidental way. So yeah, and now I've come back to drawing.
Oh yeah.
So
as like more of a hobby now, just kind of a thing that you can, or
so
for like commissions.
It has become, it's grown into slightly more than a hobby, but what happened was with drawing, I was at MacDowell writing Unlikely Animals. MacDowell is, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a writers like retreat where you apply, and then, or it's not just writers, it's artists of all disciplines. So I was there at the same time as and they like take such good care of you, and you just have a cabin and you work, and they like bring you lunch in a picnic basket, and it's like the best place in the world. So I was there for a month, and at the same time that New Yorker cartoonist Amy Kurzweil was there. And I said to her one time, like, if I could have any job in the world, like, you were my childhood dream, like, you're the person I would want to be. And I asked her, if I could ever like just look over your shoulder for like half an hour. And she's a very generous person and a really awesome teacher. She teaches a monthly class, which is only $10 on her.
Oh, good to know.
And so after dinner, when we would all hang out anyway, people didn't work, or some people worked at night, but most people just hung around. So she brought me her art supplies and showed me and a bunch of other people like how to do the sort of New Yorker style cartoon from like how she gets her ideas. She like did the whole thing.
That's awesome.
And it blew my mind. And then I got really into drawing I was still at McDowell. So every night we would all get together, like 4 or 5 of us, and draw every night. And it became like part of my process for that book.
That's really cool.
And I ended up drawing the map that is in the front of the book.
Just like incidentally, or was that sort of just like, did you plan to commission it and then decided you were going to draw it yourself? Or
no, my agent told my editor that I could draw.
Oh, okay. So it was an editorial choice.
So I actually didn't know that there was going to be a map in the front of the book. I finished the book and my editor was like, well, obviously we need a map in the front of the book. Because it's such a book about place, but she said, your agent said that you might be willing, you'd want to draw it. And I was like, oh my God, it just seemed, even though I had the book coming out with Random House, I was like, my artwork could be in a Random House book, even though it's mine. I don't know.
It's like a little more personal part of yourself that you're sharing.
Yeah, it felt like something that I didn't know if I could do. So I was,
well, it was very cool.
I did a whole drawing project with the book too for people that pre-ordered the book. So
that's where I think I saw that. I was like, oh, I missed out on that opportunity. But I think that's so nice when the authors, they give you an additional incentive for pre-ordering it to show that like they appreciate it. And then not only is it like a signed book plate or whatever, but like you literally took the time to personally draw these, which is a really above and beyond touch.
It was like a very meaningful project, and it has now. So now I still draw them, but I did have to start charging for them. I try to charge as little as possible.
But your time is valuable.
But yes. I mean, I made 500 of them. So
wow, that's a lot. How long does each one take you?
A lot of postage. What?
How long does each one take?
They take me, it really depends. At first, when I first said, if you pre-order my book, I'll draw you any animal you want, I said no pet portraits because that takes me a lot longer because I'm like drawing a specific animal. But it became clear that everyone wants pet portraits, and that was like, so
that's the market.
Like, whatever, I'll do pet portraits. So I did like over like 115 dogs and like 60 cats. So a lot of pet portraits for that. And then like random stuff like a narwhal or like a catacorn was probably the weirdest. But then someone asked me to do a portrait of Phoebe Waller-Bridge, the Fleabag actress.
Oh yeah.
That's the one person I did.
She's not, I mean, I guess everyone kind of has like an animalistic like look to them and could be drawn as an animal, but that's interesting that someone asked you for a human when
she really wanted it. So I was like,
why not?
If you really want anything, you can probably ask me.
I mean, Fleabag's a good show. I mean, if you're gonna do a human, that's a pretty solid.
She wanted the portrait like that she couldn't get on Etsy because of after she won all the Golden Globes. Is it gold? Yeah.
Like
smoking the cigarette, and there's all the statues around her. And so other people had drawn that scene, but they had left out all the statues.
Oh, so she wanted like
that's the point, that she's like,
right.
That she's got 9 statues around her, or however many statues she had.
Well, I'll have to keep that in mind though. If there is ever a super specific like film vignette or human that I need commissioned, I will come. Yeah, because Etsy, it's like you can get pretty specific, and sometimes they do customs, but then there's also just sometimes like something that you envision perfectly, and you also like know the person whose skills match that, and you're like, it's probably just easier to go to them. So what does your research process look like for these books? Because there's quite a bit of nonfiction weaved into both of them. And what are the joys and challenges of weaving in these facts and stories?
Yeah, so they have like very different research. Rabbit Cake did not take me that much research.
Right, because it's more just facts that are interwoven.
There's like the facts that are it's downstairs, and I have this book that's like an encyclopedia of animals. So basically that was just my Bible. So yeah, in Rabbit Cake, for anyone that has not read it, it is a book about a 10-year-old girl whose mother drowns while sleepwalking. But it's funny.
Right, heavy stuff while dealing with levity.
Yeah, it's which is true of both my books, but she is knows an expert of the animal world. So she's like one of those children who I love when children are experts in something. And I think
they're so precocious.
Yes. Huh?
I say they're so precocious. I love it.
Yeah. I think that most children are like experts in something. Like I used to be able to tell you every single body part of a horse, and like could not do it now. Like I would be like a hawk, I don't know what a hawk is anymore, but I know it's part of a horse.
I didn't even know it was a part of a horse. So
yeah, it is. It's like it's a foot or some, I don't know.
Or maybe like
it's like this part. I don't know.
Who knows? Yeah.
Who knows? But at a certain time in my life, I would have been able to tell you and think like you were dumb for not knowing. So Elvis, and the little girl's name is Elvis, and she has this sort of encyclopedic brain about animals, and she's lost her mom. She's got the scientific mind, and she's trying to make her way through this grief while trying to sort of map it in a scientific way, which, as we, the adult reader, knows like is not possible to.
Right. It's like one coping mechanism, but it's not necessarily the best, because we see that doesn't really go as planned.
You can't like solve grief in the way that you can solve like a scientific problem. So, and it's funny for that reason too. There's a tension between like what the adult reader knows and like what the child.
Right, because it's not a young adult novel, and it's not like a child's novel. Even though the main character is a 10-year-old girl, it's very much still like an adult novel, and also not necessarily adult in the sense that it's like.
I mean, teenagers can definitely read it. I've read it, but like,
I read adult books as a teenager too, so it's definitely it's not like inappropriate for teenagers, but it's definitely geared, I think, at having the perspective of an adult mind looking at this 10-year-old girl, who is very wise beyond her years, though, despite being 10 years old.
Yes, exactly. And that's the fun thing about a child narrator is they can have such great insight, and like you're writing like you're the man on the moon, kind of like the first person there. Right. For them, it's like everything is new. So it's such a like her voice to write from is such a pleasure, but the research question is that was my next
question. So we can talk about that after.
Oh, her voice. Yeah. Her voice is, the whole magic of that book is in that character's voice. So I have that book. That's basically all the research I did. There is sleepwalking in there. I did some research into sleepwalking, but I have sleptwalked.
Oh, interesting.
Only one major time. When I was super sleep deprived.
Did you do anything crazy?
Well, I have to tell you.
I'm like eagerly, and I'm like, I know there's a punchline coming.
I was in college, and my friend Winter and I had stayed up like the exact same amount of times to write these like senior theses we were writing. So I knew exactly how much sleep she was getting, and she knew exactly how much sleep I was getting, because we were keeping the same schedule, like to keep each other awake and kind of keep each other on track. So at the end, we both pressed send, handed it in, like probably on Friday. And I was like, great, I'm going to bed. And she just said, great, I'm going out.
Wow.
So we were both just so sleep deprived. And so I went to bed, and I used to wear, with dorms, like the heat doesn't always work.
Oh, yeah, it's unpredictable.
So it was always like too hot, and I had the smallest room on campus, even though I was a senior. So I used to sleep with like the window open a little bit, but it was upstate New York, so it was like also like -13 outside. But I would do that, but then I would wear like these flannel pajamas I had that were monogrammed with someone else's name. And then I had this hat that had ear flaps. It was a powder blue hat that had little Playboy bunnies all over it. And I would like tie it, and it was like the coziest sleeping outfit. Not meant for public eyes though. But so I was going to bed, and I was just so worried about winter. And I woke up in the middle of a frat party asking people where my friend Winter was.
So you felt the last thing you remember is kind of like drifting off and falling to sleep in your bed. And then all of a sudden you wake up and you're in a frat. Wow.
Oh, okay. But I did have shoes on. So
that's how at least you were responsible and smart. That is so crazy.
My winter boots, which you could pull on. So like it wasn't tying anything
that's insane.
But yeah, that was, so I had that experience that I knew how sort of disorienting that was.
Right.
Which helped me in that sleepwalking. But I am also a writer that feels very free to make up whatever like serves me. And with Unlikely Animals, that involved a lot more research, and so much of the book came from my research.
Right, because you were inspired by being in like New Hampshire, right? And
so I was inspired by. So that book is a more complicated book to explain, but it is about a young woman who is a healer who has come home to take care of her dying father. But it was inspired, and it's about their small town and sort of like their familial relationships in this town. But it's also very much it's inspired by this real place that I was visiting friends in New Hampshire and came across this Gilded Age mansion that I was just driving along the road and looked up, and there's this Gilded Age mansion like in the middle of what is like sort of nowhere, New Hampshire. It's like there's a covered bridge, there's a pond, there's not even other houses in this like this section of this town. And I'm like, what is that place? It looks like the nicest.
That's a story. Yeah.
And then there's no trespassing signs at the base of the driveway. So I'm like, that's someone's private property.
Owns it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So my friends did not know what it was. And so I looked up, huge, enormous yellow mansion, Newport, New Hampshire, and found out that it was this Gilded Age millionaire who had bought this house, or who had moved up there as a retirement project, knocked down the house he had been born in, except for the room he had been born in, and then built this mansion around it. And then behind that, he had bought up 60 farms, and he fenced in 26,000 acres and made an exotic animal hunting park. So I was obsessed with that because it was so interesting, and like
it's like the original Joe Exotic.
Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of very rich men who did that sort of stuff at the time. But his is so big.
I was say, that's a huge, especially in New England. I mean, New Hampshire's more rural, but still it's not like a huge state.
And it's still there. So that's the craziest thing.
Right.
This 26,000 acres is still intact, and now it belongs to a group of anonymous millionaires who hunt there and like each own a share of this huge park. So I write like dark comedies that are set now. Like I like to use the internet. I like to have cell phones. It's just sort of
it makes things easier sometimes.
Yeah, well, it's just kind of like the fictional world where my like imagination lives
has those things in it.
So it's not, and it's just like, I don't know. It just feels like that's my lane, So
I mean, even in the 80s, they still had cell. I mean, sometimes I'll read or watch something that took place and supposed to take place in the 80s. I'm like, I don't even think about them having cell phones back then, but they still did. So it's been an integral part of, and computers too. I mean, they've been part of our lives for longer than just sort of like Y2K on.
Yeah, I mean, it's, most of my memories, I had a cell phone.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
but
now kids grow up like attached to an iPad.
Although sometimes you like want your characters to not have a cell phone because you're like, I mean, I have in my book, like sometimes the dad leaves the cell phone behind, and that's like, you have to make those choices.
Right.
You want them to be unreachable, or you're like,
but it also fits his character too, because there's plenty of people around his age who do the same exact thing.
Yeah, with him, it was not that hard to be like, whereas if you had a younger character who was without their cell phone, it's like, well, you have to like make it more of a story. But with that character, that was not actually not a stretch that he would leave his cell phone behind. But then I find out as I'm researching the park that this man, Ernest Harold Baines, who was a real life Dr. Dolittle who lived in the park or at the edge of the park from 1904 till 1925. And he had animals in his house. He had a fox, he had deer, he had wolves, he had a bear. And once I found out about him, I was like, he has to be a character. Yeah. I'm like too obsessed. I love him. So yeah, he's a ghost in the book. So it's set in 2014, but he is a ghost. So that was like a huge amount of research. His real writing is in the book, although it's like I was able to mess with it because it's in public domain, and his real photographs are in the book.
Take sort of what existed and make your own story out of it to help your story.
Public domain is crazy. Like the fact that.
But you can do that.
Yeah. Mickey Mouse is coming into public domain and they keep trying to fight it. Or they've been able to fight it like forever, and now.
I mean, because there's so many unlicensed Mickey Mouse things or just like unofficial Mickey Mouse things that it's almost like easier just to do it. Like it just seems harder to keep fighting all the.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much money.
Yeah, I always forget that like the public domain exists. Like that's always a good resource.
Yeah, it's so yeah, that was an intense amount of research, and like it was such a gift. But I don't know if I would do that. I mean, it would have to be the right thing would have to come to me to write another novel like that, where I was gonna, go around to historical societies and really like
immerse yourself in a different way. Yeah, no, that makes sense. It kind of, it came to you too in its own serendipitous way, which is really cool.
Yeah, it has to. I mean, I feel like every novel kind of has to hit me in the face before I pay attention.
No, I think that's true for a lot of people. And I totally agree with that. So let's talk about perspective for both of your books. The first one, as we discussed, Rabbit Cake, is narrated by a 10-year-old girl named Elvis. The second one, Unlikely Animals, is the narrative framing is this sort of town chorus of ghosts who have lived and died in the town. So totally different perspectives, totally different narrations. I mean, they both have a similar levity to them. As we discussed, they deal with death and dark subjects and grief, but they make the most out of them because I think humor and levity are the only ways to go through life. If you're dwelling, you have to embrace the pain as well, but to dwell in it is like, we see how that goes and it doesn't always go well. So where did those perspectives come from? Did you figure them out along the way? Did you sort of go into that with those framings? If you want to talk a little bit about each one separately.
Sure, yeah. So Elvis, the character that's in Rabbit Cake, the first person, that was like, I had her voice from the first page. That was always like the guiding light of that book. Like I sat down in Starbucks and wrote the first sentence, which I'm forgetting now, but it's pretty much
it's okay.
The exact
you don't
same
have to know it off the top of your head.
Yeah, it's something about like, before mom, like the year mom burnt the rabbit cake, or the same year mom walked into the river, like she burnt the rabbit cake or something. That's not the sentence, but whatever it was is something like that. I wrote that sentence in the Starbucks. It was called a rabbit cake right from the beginning. The mom always drowned in the first page, and the voice was always there, and that was what I had. And so And I always say about that book, like, it doesn't really matter what happens in that book. Like, a lot of different things could have happened plot wise. All that matters is that you love that character. And that's,
which I totally do. I fell in love. And I can't remember what the first sentence was either, but the first page, I was like totally hooked.
Oh, thank you. I can't believe I can't remember the first sentence, but my brain has been
It's okay, and it's late. Our listeners, viewers, it's 9 p.m. on the East Coast, so it is. You are totally excused from having a functional thought.
I wish I had a copy of here, but I don't. Well,
it's a good excuse for someone. If you haven't read it, check it out. We'll link.
Yeah, and you know what? You can just like go and look at the first page and see if you like it. Yeah. They do have, you can look at I do like that feature on being able to go online and look at someone's first page. So really the challenge was figuring out what did need to happen in that book in order to make it like, I want her, especially with the child narrator who's going through a tough spot in a life, you want her to be okay in the end. And so I had to kind of figure out how she was going to be okay in the end, what like things needed to happen in order for that to be believable. But the voice was my guiding light. And I think the reason that book has had, a good long life at this point, it's been out for 5 years. So when I went to write Unlikely Animals, the second book, I had to like cleanse myself of that very strong voice. And I knew I could not write another first person narrator because her voice was so strong that I probably would have just ended up writing like a bad version of her voice.
So it was a little bit of a conscious choice to kind of.
Yeah, definitely. But her voice was like so strong. I just could have, and I worked on that book for a long time too. So I had been writing in her voice for a long time.
It's like you created your own, I mean, you have your own child now, but at the time you didn't, right? So it's like you created your own like child out of nothing. And she's like still existing and moving along with, even though she kind of doesn't age beyond the page. Totally. Like she's her own fully formed idea and being to you.
Yeah, to me, like Clive, the dad, and Elvis are like very, very like full real people to me. Elvis, like she could walk into my life and I wouldn't be that surprised. Right. But yeah, so Unlikely Animals was originally written in this omniscient third person narrator because I wanted to write a grander book than Rabbit Cake, like a book where it does matter what happens and where like the plot is pretty intricate, because I didn't feel like the plot, like I said, like the plot is not the point of Rabbit Cake.
Yeah.
In some like actually really important ways, the plot is not the point, because some people have said like, why isn't it a murder mystery? And I'm like, well, that's like not the book. But it's like about grieving and how we don't get answers. So anyway, so Unlikely Animals, I wanted it to have like a real, like a sort of John Irving style, like everything that is in the book matters to the plot in the end. And so that was my goal. So I wrote this omniscient narrator, but I have a friend, Lucas Mann, who's a very good writer. He's written a bunch of memoirs.
Oh, I like him. I think he follows me on Twitter. I like him.
Oh,
yeah. Cool. I read one of his books a while ago. I think it was about like reality TV or something. Yeah. And I love reality TV. So I've liked his stuff for a while.
He's very smart and very lovely. And so Lucas said to me, well, this omniscient narrator like has too much personality. It's like, this non-person is making jokes all the time, and who is talking? And I was like, Lucas, I don't care. So I didn't worry about it until I got to MacDowell and was there for a month. And then I was like, okay, I should probably address what Lucas was talking about. I think it is a problem, like, but who is talking? And I didn't want to do a first person narrator because it was actually impossible at that point, because I had this omniscient stuff
would have totally reframed the book.
Yeah, I would have. So I didn't. I was kind of a little bit lost, but my first or second day there. They give you a tour when you get there, and they kind of like teach you how much history you are sitting in, and like sort of that they like don't waste this opportunity because like greatness has walked these halls, and like why the F would we have picked you?
That's really cool.
And so Thornton Wilder wrote Our Town at MacDowell, and the Our Town Cemetery is at MacDowell. And I have this like long love of cemeteries anyway. I lived in a cemetery when I lived in Alabama.
Wait, that's amazing. What do you have to elaborate on that?
I moved to Alabama for my graduate school program right after a big tornado hit Tuscaloosa. And so like a lot of the graduates' housing was taken out. Like I have a friend who his whole apartment was gone except for the bathroom he was in.
Oh my God, that's so scary.
So it was like, I was not there at the time of the tornado. But it was, people had some real scars from surviving a major tornado. And so someone who was already in the program found a house that had not been rented for a while because it was in the middle of the cemetery. Like you would drive into the gates and like drive along the cemetery, and it was like right there. And so we moved in, and I like immediately adopted this very large dog. So I like felt safe with, the only thing that was bad about living in a cemetery was like teenagers drinking in the cemetery.
Right. Or just like random
which is,
people.
Like, not that,
like,
it does make me uneasy, like, I don't know. I don't like to be,
Yeah, you're treading on hallowed ground. Like, go to a park or a 7-Eleven. Like,
yeah, just like don't. But, other than that, it was a perfect place to live. So I have a long affinity for cemeteries, and my mom is a big bird watcher, and cemeteries are like often a place that warblers like Mount Auburn Cemetery, which you've probably been to
many times. Yes.
Yeah. So Mount Auburn Cemetery is like a big warbler hotspot when the warblers migrate. So you can go and see like tons of warblers. So I grew up going to Mount Auburn Cemetery with my mom to like look at birds.
And there's some beautiful just like nature and topiary there too.
Yeah, and
landscape.
A lot of it's famous people who are
historical too. Yeah,
but I can't remember who was buried there.
I'm neither. I'm like, oh, famous people. Yeah, famous people.
But it's so anyway. So I decided that it did make sense maybe to do an Our Town style pre-chorus, but I was scared to do it because George Saunders had done Lincoln in the Bardo like 1 or 2 years before this.
It's different enough though.
Yeah, I didn't want to like I didn't want to be like a poor man's George Saunders, but so I tried it, and I showed it to my friend who was there, and he was like, "This is totally different. This is
it's totally. I was gonna say it's like comparing apples and oranges."
Yeah, but at the beginning it was scary. But once he like gave me permission, and I like kind of saw, because I had done that third person omniscient first, that it was like it worked better because it was putting the voice onto the story. The story already had that voice really. It was more like that I had like the chorus come through, but it also totally made everything make sense that hadn't really made sense before. It's like, why are we hearing these two? Like, I'm obsessed with this 2014 town, and I'm obsessed with this town where Ernest Harold Baines, the Dr. Dolittle character, lived, like, in the 1920s. But how do you bring those two, like, who else cares about those two time periods besides me? Well, the ghosts in the cemetery would care about the past and the present, just so it, like, sort of crystallized what I was writing about, and it like could not have worked without that sort of like lightning sort of, or lucky, I guess. A lot of it was luck, I think, just the like to be in the right place to get that idea at the right time.
And, you know, you had to evolve to it too. It wasn't through the feedback of yourself and other people. And I think that self-doubt and being vulnerable is a big part of it too. And admitting, you know, that it's not always sunshine and rainbows and you have to sort of swallow your pride because someone can say something is good and you're like, you don't believe them at first. And then you're like, oh, okay, maybe they were right. You know, it takes a little bit of time. Of course, I have to ask, where did the idea of the actual rabbit cakes come from? And have they spurned any sort of fan following or like, you know, hashtag rabbit cake on Instagram, like competition?
I have a huge amount of pictures of rabbit cakes on my phone. So where we have a rabbit cake, we had like a rabbit cake pan that was from like the 50s that my mom has always had. So we had rabbit cake pan growing up that my mom would make. We also had a lamb pan. So the lamb pans were more popular because they don't fall, like the head doesn't fall off as easily.
Oh, it's an easier shape. Yeah, more circular.
So lambs were like, there were more lamb pans, but we had the rabbit cake pan. My family has always weirdly like loved rabbits.
I love bunnies and rabbits too. So I was like, I saw the title and I was like, ooh, I was already hooked.
Yeah, I feel like I've sold so many books to like rabbit people. My mom had a huge white rabbit growing up, and she used to write into like pixie sticks and like places to try to get free food, free candy.
Hey, why not?
And she wrote into Trix cereal and said, "My white rabbit loves your cereal." And they did not have a mascot back then. So like family legend is that
your mom inspired the Trix rabbit. That's pretty cool.
I mean, we have absolutely no proof other than
that's a pretty cool family lore though.
Yeah. I mean, I will keep telling that story until everyone believes it's true. So yeah, we had the rabbit cake pan, but at the time that I started writing it, so it was a family thing, but you couldn't get them anywhere. You could get them on eBay, but they didn't, like, you couldn't buy them. Ones that had not, but William Sonoma came out with one as I'm writing the book.
Oh.
And then once William Sonoma came out with one, like so did, you know, a bunch
Target
of Target
and TJ Maxx and all else.
Now you can get them like easily. And there's different, you know, like I had the one that it's like the two-sided mold with like a steam hole.
Yeah.
It's like, and it's more realistic. There are ones that a lot of people make the like, just they make a cake and then they cut another cake in half and then they make
like the classic cartoon rabbit.
I've seen everything. And then only one person has ever made me sign a rabbit cake pan. Someone brought one to a reading, which was very cute. But yeah, I've seen a lot of books clubs have made me rabbit cakes. So there's like a lot of cake in 2017 when the book came out. And so it was, that was like such a fun tour and like way to like live in the book, just like have cake all the time. But my agent did ask me the day before the book came out. She was like, "So wait, do I like inject the jam into it after I make it or before?" And I was like, "I don't know." And she's like, "What? It's on page 4 of the book, Annie. Like, I'm like, it's fiction. Like,
right, you're like, I didn't actually make it myself and test it out.
I had made them with my mom when I was little, but I had made one for my like thesis, and I had to make 2 because their heads do fall off, and so that showed up.
They're very precarious, yeah.
Yeah, because they're like, their heads and their ears fall off, and you're like. So Katie, my agent, is like a really great baker, and she had this like, she has these instructions that like if you use box cake mix, like use extra, like it's either less water or more water. I don't know.
I'm so bad at baking and cooking. It's like all that precise, especially baking, because if you mess up one little thing, you're in trouble.
Yeah, you have to like really follow the instructions. So but for my New York event made like the most beautiful rabbit cake, like a true work of art. So she's amazing, and it had like gold glistening eyes, like it had like a little.
She like went all out on the
eyes.
decorating.
Yeah,
cake boss.
Yeah, I teased her about it in the because her first attempt, I was like, oh, it's so lifelike, just like teasing her. But she didn't take that well.
You don't want to be actually eating rabbit. Plenty of people do.
Yeah, well, in the book, they're supposed to be like lifelike, right? Kind of like to a child, they're lifelike. But
I mean, how lifelike can you really make a cake? Anyways, it's still cake.
Well, that's
you can too. I was saying, is it cake? There's a whole.
Yeah.
Never mind. I was gonna say, just kidding. You can make it. But like, if you're an amateur baker, I mean, that's more like nailed it.
Right, but wait, did I start? Is it cake?
Another theory. Hey, why not? I mean, I'll buy into it. So I know it's late on the East Coast, so I'll ask you one more question. You experienced your own journey with motherhood throughout the writing of Unlikely Animals. So how did this influence your perspective on Annie and her relationship with her parents?
On Emma?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, on Emma.
On Emma.
Annie is you. I'm like, it's a little late here too. Yeah, tell me about your psychology.
Well, no, I mean,
no.
I mean, that's an intense question. If it's like, how does motherhood? I'd answer it. Like I'm kind of an open book, but so motherhood. I am still working out how. So my daughter she's about to be 3 next month. I'm still working out how she influences my writing, because I have kind of worked pretty hard to keep my creative work life separate from my mom life, because they don't feel very compatible to me at this stage.
I think that's pretty important for a lot of things for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's normal for people who work any other job that you don't try not to let your child bleed into. But so my friends and I have been we're baby podcasters. We have 8 episodes of this podcast called Here to Save You, which is a podcast about parenting and writing. And my friend Tessa is obsessed with this question of how does parenting make your writing better? And I am always I don't know if the answer is that it does. I mean, we all agree that it makes life harder, because
of course you have an additional human being that you're taking care of. You're no longer just in charge of yourself.
Yeah. So everybody knows that no matter what life stage you're in, you're okay, yeah, parenting is harder than not parenting. But how does it make it? And I guess I don't know how it really influenced Unlikely Animals, other than what did influence Unlikely Animals is my relationship to my parents. Because so much of the book for me is about this fear of your parents dying, and this sort of the adult realization that no matter how powerful you become as an adult, there's nothing you can do to prevent your parents from leaving someday.
Right.
And that and Emma has to, she's born with the magic healing touch, and she cannot heal her father. She knows that there's nothing she can do to save him, even though she was born with magic. Or some magic.
That's a really heavy burden for someone to carry.
Yeah, so she's got the added guilt that I think that I have always been aware of. I'm so aware of the last thing I always the last thing.
No, I totally get that too. Because or even if someone I know when I was younger, after 9/11, if one of my parents was on a plane, I would always just hold my breath until that flight landed. Certain things that is you just kind of feel, even though you don't have control over it, you kind of feel like you do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just the way that you want to protect those you love is a very strong feeling. And I think that applies to parenting too. But yeah, I mean, the novel is about caretaking, and it is about caretaking for your adult parents, and also the impossibility of caretaking for adult children. That Augie, the brother, is struggling with a drug addiction, and so his parents have not been able to like control him either, and that's something that
he's like caught between
you kind of have to come to
childhood and adulthood.
Yeah, like that you can't. There's only so much we can all control anybody else in our family.
Yes.
And so no matter like how much you love them, no matter like how many restrictions you put on them, like, and that's just part of being in a family. So there's a lot of that in this book that is just exploring all those things. But yeah, so it's, and I did write a lot of this book before I was a mother. So the only line that I did add that someone just sent me yesterday that I'm remembering now is one of the kids who's in the 5th grade class that Emma teaches says, well, sometimes my mom says she wished she could quit motherhood if she could.
Yeah, I'm sure
like
that's a feeling.
Yeah.
I don't even have my own children.
No.
I mean, I think, I don't even have my own children, and I babysit sometimes, and I'm just like, I don't know how I don't even want to do this for more than like a few hours. Like, it's a lot, and you sometimes wish you could quit, but it's a job you really can't ever quit.
Yeah. They're always there.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing some of your personal history and insights. And I'm excited, can you tell us, is there anything coming next? Are you working on a 3rd book or project that you can share?
Yeah, I'm working on another novel. So we'll see. I'm working on another novel. I'm working on some essays. So hopefully my editor likes them, and then I will have a release date. But I'm still in the writing cave right now. Yeah. So
we will keep an eye out for those. Well, thank you for joining. We will link everything below. And until next time, everyone, stay reading.